Hello everybody, my name is ModelOmega, and I am pleased to announce yet another new series of videos I will be tackling. The Newcomer's Guide to Fire Emblem Thracia 776. Now first off, this is not an introduction to Fire Emblem as a whole, but rather one specific game. This game, 1999's SNES Fire Emblem Thracia 776, is often considered not just one of the hardest RPGs ever, but certainly the hardest Fire Emblem that doesn't resort to fake or cheap difficulty, a sentiment I fully agree with and endorse. The fact is, playing 776 as your first Fire Emblem may entail the risk of alienating you from the series due to its very quirks and ideas that both make it fun and interesting, but also challenging and frustrating in some cases. I find that given the very assortment of unique and challenging aspects 776 offers, that it would be extremely hazardous to enter the game blind or close to blind. What this series aims to do is provide a comprehensive list of tips, strategies, tactics, and other advice chapter to chapter to aspiring 776 players that are already familiar with Fire Emblem as a whole. For a seasoned Fire Emblem veteran, I always recommend that you at least read up on 776 until Chapter 8, if you want to go as blind as possible, and the same will hold true here as well. But otherwise, feel free to utilize this chapter-by-chapter look as a newcomer's guide to Thracia 776. However, for this first video, I will start by going over some of the unique quirks and gameplay features of this game. One of the most notable things 776 does differently is the magic stat, in that it works very similarly to the special stat from Gen 1 Pokemon games. What I am referring to here is that magic is now both the magic stat that affects your damage, as well as a resistance stat that decreases your magic damage. What this means is that items like the Ward Staff and Holy Water that would originally raise resistance now increase your magic, which means more damage in addition to less damage from magic. In general, magic users are simply the best units in the game because of these quirks, just like how the special stat made some Gen 1 mons stupidly powerful. But we'll get into the specifics of why magic is so important, both later in this video and later on in the guide. As I stated, this stat replaces resistance. Build works pretty much the same as Constitution from the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem games. Weapons with a weight higher than the unit's build have their speed subtracted by the difference. What's different, however, is that build is an actual stat with growth this time, meaning it can increase without promoting or items. And it also has ties to perhaps the biggest gameplay innovation 776 has. Capturing is essentially rescuing enemy units. If your build is higher than your opponent's, then you can elect to capture a unit instead of simply attacking and killing them. While capturing, your stats, aside from hit points, luck, and build, are halved, but if you deplete an enemy's HP this way, then you capture them. A captured unit can have their items traded away, and when done, you can simply release a captured unit and they will instantly exit the map. This is your principal means of acquiring items and weapons, as shops are all quite expensive, and your only method of acquiring money is by selling items or fighting in the arena. There are 3 exceptions to capturing. Units with a build of 20 cannot be captured by any means. Mounted units for capturing purposes are treated as though they have 20 build, meaning they can capture any foot unit in the game with less than that amount, but themselves cannot be captured unless dismounted. And finally, any unit that is not equipped with a weapon, or is asleep, can be instantly captured without combat. As a precaution, enemies can also capture and will sometimes attempt to capture your units as well, and as a prime example of AI cheating, they can instantly trade away your items with the capturing unit on the same turn, whereas you need to wait for the unit to have its own movement again, or have another ally do the trading for you. An enemy that captures one of your units will attempt to flee the map, and if they are successful, the unit they are carrying is lost until a chapter very close to the end of the game that gives you an opportunity to rescue captured units. Simply killing an enemy holding one of your units will release them, but note that items captured or stolen by enemies will not automatically be reobtained by killing them. You need to either steal them back or capture the unit yourself. On that note, trading and inventory management are heavily modified compared to most of the series. All units have 7 spaces of inventory, and as long as you don't end a unit's turn or initiate combat, any unit can trade as many times as you need to on the same turn, which is great for trading items between 2 or 3 adjacent units, as well as captured foes, changing an ally's equipped weapon, or just fixing an inventory error. "776 was also the first game to allow thieves to steal instead of just opening doors and chests, and stealing can be a nasty mechanic in this game if used properly. Simply put, as long as your thief has a higher speed than the enemy, and whatever you're trying to steal has a lower weight than the thief's build, then you can steal anything, including equipped weapons. Just remember that the reverse is also true, so watch out for enemy thieves. And note that lockpicks are a thing in this game, and thieves need them to open locks of any kind. Supporting in 776 is very simple, effective, extremely useful, and does not have to be built up over mounds of turn skipping. Simply put, when 2 units are within 3 movement spaces of another, the supported unit gains an additional 10%, or with a few rare pairs 20% to hit, avoid, critical hit, and critical avoid rate. A very helpful tip to remember is that supports work in the arena as well, so if you're venturing into it and have support pairs, make sure they stay together. However, one wrinkle with this is that supports are often not reciprocal. For example, Leaf supports a staggering amount of units, but he himself is only supported by 1 unit, Nana. You can check the full list on Serenus Forest, but as always, when covering individual units, I will cover who supports whom. Cavalry have a couple different quirks as well. For starters, just like in Genealogy of the Holy War and the Radiance games, mounted units have Canto, allowing them to use up leftover movement after any action. Returning from Monsho no Nazo is dismounting. Cavalry must do so to go indoors or to be deployed in indoor chapters. And aside from Bow Knights, all mounted units are restricted to swords when dismounted, including Lance and Axe Knights. And no, they can't use swords when mounted for whatever reason. Also, a cavalry unit that is put to sleep will instantly dismount, which in turn means that a sleep staff is the only way to capture mounted enemies. All of these stipulations, by the way, as well as the capturing mechanics, also apply to flying units, so take that in mind. What this integer, often abbreviated as PCC, that has a value from 0 to 5 does, is that for any attack that is part of the unit's double or second attack, their critical rate is multiplied by the integer. So if a character, say, has a crit rate of 20 and a PCC of 3, each of his second attacks after the first would have a crit rate of 60. See, there is power in math after all. Standard crit rate is also based directly off of the user's skill, and not half of it. And perhaps as a consequence for all of these wonderful features, any unit's crit rate has a maximum value of 25% during any initial attack before PCC is triggered. Pursuit critical coefficients are a huge factor, no pun intended, in this game. Some characters are directly prized because they have a huge PCC of 4 or 5, while others are devalued due to having a PCC of 1 or sometimes even 0. And yes, just like in real math, any character unfortunate enough to have a PCC of 0 means that any of their second attacks will have a crit rate of 0. The 12 Crusader Scrolls of 776 work just like the Star Orb fragments from Monsho no Nazo in that they provide various bonuses or alterations to a character's growth rate, with each providing a net gain of 30% overall. You can find a list of each scroll bonus on serenusforest.net, as well as a guide to their locations, though I will be going over both in my guide whenever they become applicable as well. In addition, each scroll carries the bonus effect of making the holder immune to critical hits that are not triggered by the skill Wrath, which can be invaluable when facing enemies with killer weapons. These are two small additional wrinkles to 776 that exist to both provide you with a small opportunity for extra utility, but mostly to just give the enemy even more ways to screw with you. Leadership stars may be familiar if you've played Radiant Dawn, and they work in similar ways. For each star an army has, they gain an additional 3% hit and avoid rate. It's cumulative, meaning it is the added total of every unit that has stars, and not just the leader, as in Dawn. These mostly exist to give you more reason to take bosses out, as they start to get 3 to 5 of them as the game progresses, and there is one reoccurring enemy with 10 of them, but that'll become apparent when he first appears. Movement stars are something entirely different. For each star a unit has, anywhere from 0 to 5, they get a 5% chance to gain an extra turn after ending theirs. Eventually bosses and some enemies start to get these, and the absolute worst feeling is barely surviving an enemy attack only for someone to proc a star and finish you off, though the reverse is true as well. As with all other attributes, these stars will be mentioned individually for each unit, if they have them. If you've played the Game Boy Advance games, Radiant Dawn, Shadow Dragons multiplayer, or Path to Radiance on hard mode, then you're already familiar with the Fog of War mechanic. But as 776 was the first game to introduce it, there are a couple of differences it has compared to the later games. For starters, thieves don't get extra sight, and torches, along with the torch staff, provide 10 spaces of extra sight, decreasing by 1 each turn just like in other games. In addition, sight in movement is only determined by the unit's end position, not the path they traveled, so keep that in mind. Aside from these though, Fog of War, which I jokingly like to call Darkness of War in this game since no chapter actually has a fog in it, works just the same. If you've played either of the Radiance games, then you're familiar with this win condition where the chapter ends once the Lord has escaped. Well, in 776 there is an additional wrinkle to that. When Leaf escapes, any unit left behind is automatically captured. So, just make sure Leaf is the last units to escape in any of these situations. First introduced between Chapters 7 and 8 when the preparation screen becomes available, fatigue is a system that affects what units can be deployed or not. Each time a unit attacks, dances, is attacked, or uses a staff, their fatigue is raised by 1 point. If a unit's fatigue score exceeds their max hit points by the end of the chapter, then they become tired and cannot be deployed in the next chapter. The only 2 ways to remove fatigue from a unit are to not deploy them or to have them hold an S rank during preparations while fatigued, either of which will lower their score back to 0. But don't expect to rely on S-drinks, by the way. They are quite rare, and in the few shops that sell them, they are prohibitively expensive. However, note that staffs behave somewhat differently in this regard. E-rank staffs increase fatigue by 1, but D ranks by 2, C by 3, B by 4, and A and personal staffs by 5. This is important to take note of, since most staff users have low HP. Yes, even staffs get their own segment, because they just have so many damn quirks to them in this game. For starters, heal staffs can miss. I don't know why, but you can check the specifics of it on Serenus Forest. But in return, heal staffs can cast twice in some situations for double the healing, so there's that for you. However, status staffs are where the bulk of the attention is. Their effects, Sleep, Berserk, and Silence, along with the poisoning and new status element Petrification, are permanent until the end of the chapter, unless a restore staff is used, or an antidote is used to cure the poison. Any ranged staff can cast across the entire map, by the way, so you can warp or rescue units anywhere, or heal anywhere on the map with a Psychic or Fortify staff. When it comes to the Sleep, Berserk, and Silent staffs, while they have an accuracy, all that is initially required to cast them is a higher magic stat than the target. Be especially wary about this with enemies. A Bishop or Dark Mage with a Sleep staff is an incredibly dangerous foe and should be dealt with immediately, since any sleeping unit can be captured without combat. All of these factors, as well as the ridiculous stuff you can pull off with the Warp and Rescue staffs, make them invaluable tools. There is no hyperbole when I say that staff users are perhaps the most vital units of your whole army, so take good care of them. Well, that just about covers all of the fundamental gameplay elements. Items like skills and weapons will be covered whenever they are first brought up. So for now, we are done, and I will be back later with the first actual chapter guide. See you then, and thank you for watching.